In this video, we're ranking every ownable car in the base game of Cyberpunk 2077 after 2.0. Everything from lightning-fast speed demons, monster trucks, to James Bond-inspired sports cars with their own guns. I'll be diving into every conceivable strength and weakness to decide, once again, which are best. Note that cars exclusively from Phantom Liberty, as well as bikes, are getting their own videos, else this one would be 2 hours long. But I will be making a tier list as we go through all three, so let's get to it. Knocked down to last place this time, we have the regular Thorton Galena, still costing a very cheap 13k, only now of course all purchasable vehicles are bought via Muammar El Capitan Reyes auto fixer websites, as opposed to out in the world itself. Bit less of an adventure, I know, but at least these purchases still come with a small amount of lore. Apparently, this one was immortalized back in 2034 after the punk rock hit Poundin' Gina in My Galena, a much better rhyming couplet, admittedly, than Pan Am and Basilisk. This was designed to be an affordable people's car of the 2030s, and that's about all it is. Barely able to exceed 90 on level terrain, a docked speed from 1.6, this is the slowest car in the game now, not to mention the crappiest looking. Though if beaten up pile of rust, common, inconspicuous car is what you're going for, then this is a winner. Just don't use your coupon discounts on it because the ratio here is not prosperous. Apparently, the guy who owned it last got shot through his window after a sheltered life of paranoia, and apparently, by buying this, we're grabbing life by the balls and avoiding the same fate. Though I'd argue we could live a better life with literally any other car. And in fact, with the dash double jump air dash method of getting around on foot now, this thing is barely faster than us, able to traverse the same distance a mere 29% faster on the straight than we can. In 2.0 though, it's not just about speed. Thanks to the addition of vehicle combats, we now have to test these things for toughness and ramming power too. So I've devised a few tests for each vehicle. Firstly, how many arm cannons can they survive? A measly 1 for the Galena. How many mags of Dying Night can we unload before the car explodes, for which this survived 3. The tyres shot out in 1, and ramming power was pretty much non-existent, with 0 road presence and being pushed around by every other car. Looking at the scannable stats too, this is a weak horsepower, especially when ratioed up against its weight. Pretty indisputable bottom of the D tier, this one. Bumped up to second last now is the Mahir Supron FS3, a minivan that not even Reyes can defend in his sales pitch, describing it as, quote, like a group of hobos glued together a bathtub and a trash can and slapped on some dinner plates for wheels, end quote. And yeah, it's not great, but does, for an extra 3k eddies, hit a marginally faster 96 compared to the Galena. That is when it's totally empty. Being a minivan though, one might be tempted to, load it up with stuff. However, the ease at which this thing can lose control when making micro adjustments renders that a worrying prospect, with the thing receiving a -F in crash testing. Mind you, deliberately testing the crashing mechanic myself, I found it wasn't actually able to reach a high enough speed to cause any kind of notably disastrous collision. That said, despite being nothing special, I found it still slightly effective at bullying other road users, apparently.
Oh, sorry!
That is unless they just drive off, since we can't actually catch anyone in this. Though it did hold its own in combat, for a solid 30 seconds at least, before we had to bail. Testing durability manually though, it again took just 1 projectile and 3 Dying Night mags to blow up. Not something you'd want to be caught dead in, though that is a far more likely possibility here. Another D tier, obviously. The classic American station wagon next, Thorton Colby actually doesn't feel devilishly slow compared to the previous two, though is still a far cry from the majority of this list, clocking out at just 100 miles per hour, but it definitely feels like it gets there quicker. Contextually, over 50 million of these were sold in North America by 2060, and it's easy to see why. At a cost of just 18 grand, there's plenty of boot space and enough horsepower for it to keep pootling along even fully loaded. Also, I don't know if anyone noticed or cares, but this is one of the only vehicles to receive a total retexture in 2.0, now sporting a black and grey vibe as opposed to the old style turquoise. Not sure why it was changed, but I kinda like it. Combat wise, it's again nothing special. The tyres shoot out in 1 hit, 3 mags of Dying Night to the engine will cause it to explode, though in fairness it did survive a projectile once, though when I reloaded it blew up a second time in just 1 hit. Fluke? Who knows. Fun fact about the model we buy though, which could have even buffed it up a few spots out on a different day, this car was actually formerly owned by Nicolas Cage, or a Nicholas at any rate, though the inclusion of Carjacker, Memphis, and Nicholas in the same sentence sounds very much like a Gone in 60 Seconds reference to me. Tempted to put it in C tier for that, but it was practically designed to sit at the bottom. Our fourth D-tier vehicle then is the Villefort Columbus, and the thing about these first 4 cars, to their merit, is that actually they're the only 4 you can order from AutoFixer prior to the heist. Granted, they can't quite beat the Archer Hella starter overall, but this one at least does have some bonus utility. With a top speed again of about 100 and a combat endurance that's nothing to write home about, the Columbus's only strength is the fact that we can drive with the back doors open. Maybe in Cyberpunk Orion this feature can extend to being able to park a bike in the back of this moving van as a cool way to disappear from traffic. I'm kidding, that's not the only strength. And given that this is one of the only ownable pre-heist vehicles, the Columbus allows you to reach some higher places at a cheaper price than tendons or ankles, I think, costing a mere 19k. In fact, it can even stack with the leg cyberware to be stood on top of later in the game and get to the occasional difficult to reach ledge. Other than that, since CDPR thankfully don't bloat their game with shallow, meaningless fetch quests, we don't become a delivery driver and thus don't really need one of these. The model we can acquire was formerly owned by a drug dealer, and Reyes even recommends we get something else if we're not a fan of those kinds of smells. Basically, it's the same as it's always been. Buy it up if you do a lot of adventurous parkouring. You may be wondering what a car that looks this good is doing right down here in D tier. Let me explain. The Shion Bonewrecker used to be a second Shion Coyote that you could get after making one of the worst decisions in the entire game. I delve into detail in my worst decisions video, but in brief, during With a Little Help from My Friends, one of Panam's side quests where we steal a tank, we have the hidden option to go behind Panam's back and rat her out to Saul, making her look like an idiot and stopping her dead in her tracks. Afterwards, as a reward for our honesty, Saul will gift us this vehicle to pick up at the Sunset Motel. If we were assessing purely the car alone, it would be a lot higher up. Weaponized with mounted guns reaching top speeds of 160, though generally staying around 140, and coming with reinforced tires, though it still blows up after 2.5 dying Nightmax. It looks the same as it did before, and it's quite good, but stats and name-wise, it is quite definitively worse than the Shion Coyote, which you'll find towards the end of the video, unsurprisingly. Worse still, it means Panam will never speak to us again, and this will have more of a knock-on effect than you think, locking us out of not just choices in the base game, but also a few things for Phantom Liberty now too. I just hope you don't have a burning need to collect every unique vehicle in the game, because now, well, this is very much its own car in its own right. But really, if we just want to pretend it's still a Coyote, and an inferior one at that with lower horsepower, then that's fine too, to stop you feeling like you have to get it. As far as starter cars go, you just can't beat the starter car. Archer Hella not only has a little bit more speed and power than the rest, topping about 102, but it can also hold its own in combat, I found out, with a little more toughness. Tires take 2 shots to puncture instead of 1, though in fairness, I don't think I've really had my tires punctured by an enemy, so I'm not sure how important this is. But I did sink over 4 magazines of Dying Night into this thing before it finally gave up. This definitely carried through into police chases as well, with the car surviving all the way up until being shot at by a hellhound. Contextually, it's the best people's car ever made, with most lasting well over 54 years from their manufacture in 2023. The oldest car I've ever owned in real life by comparison is from 2004, and the chassis of that is about to crumple into rust, so this to me is exceptionally impressive, especially given the Hella is said to be made from cheap parts. It was so successful in fact that the NCPD now drive around in legions of souped up versions, suggesting it's got the best balance of economy and quality. Just sucks for Archer that making a car that good and durable merely meant taking potential returning customers off the market forever. The quote-unquote heaviest car ever allowed to roam the streets now, and first thing I'd like to pedantically point out is that this simply isn't true. In fact, the Thrax Jefferson's whole thing at this point is to serve as a cheap frickin' knockoff of the Alvarado Delegate and its variants, with the same top speed of 118, but a lower horsepower and hilariously a lower weight. Some false advertising from Chevrolet there. What this car is, though, is one of the heavy-duty vehicles of choice for Night City gangers everywhere. Are you a Valentino prepping prepping for a night of war against 6th Street, well, in one of these things, survival isn't an entirely off-the-table prospect, with armored plating able to take over 4 dying night mags and blowing up after 2 projectiles. Not bad stats, though I must say I'd hoped for better from a vehicle with such a tough-looking exterior. According to Reyes, it's the next best thing to a yacht you can get when you're afraid of the ocean, and costs a significantly cheaper $34K. Though, since our good friend Kerry Eurodyne has a yacht available to go cruising on, that's not exactly a selling point to us. Buy it for completionist vibes, but otherwise there's very similar, albeit slightly better equivalents to this. Basically, a more elegant version of the Archer Hella, or a cheaper but just as good equivalent to the Thrax Jefferson. The Villefort Cortes Valor comes in at just 28,000 eddies. As the basis for all Delamain cabs, this needs to be stylish but not overstated, sturdy yet elegant. And whilst labelled as sporting style over substance, I still found it survived a fair onslaught of gunfire before giving up. It may only have reached top speeds of 116, but the reduced curb weight when compared to the Jefferson makes it accelerate just as well, despite being cheaper. However, it is a little less tough in combat. Where the Valor ultimately wins out for me then is, well, 2 things. Firstly, same as the previous video, this thing still sports a pink colouring, and reminds me of my favourite childhood game, The Simpsons Hit and Run, reasonably matching Homer Simpson's car from that. Also though, for those running the game ray-traced, this reflective strip on the roof is a great way to appreciate the graphical power this game has to offer. Honestly, it's insane what the Red Engine has been able to do here, and makes me wonder if the Orion sequel on Unreal 5 will look anything like one of those photorealistic games we're starting to see crop up. The Thorton Colby Butte is now literally just a Thorton Colby lifted up onto higher suspension, given stronger tyres, and the rear of a pickup. For these upgrades, it'll set you back a little more, 25k now as opposed to 18, if you want your model in green. Otherwise, same as always, head out to the film shoot north of Rocky Ridge, where a RAF and Shiv raid has just taken place, to salvage this one for free. It being a Colby means it's still clocking out at about 100, but sports a bit of extra horsepower and weight for ramming, though is far from the best pickup in the game for this now. Mind you, it does still traverse the Badlands pretty well, and rocking up to scanner hustles inside this thing will make for a significantly easier time than, say, dashing around on foot. Also, the cool thing about owning 2 of them is you have a backup should the first take 2 projectiles to the chassis. Destroyed cars indeed have a 5-minute cooldown now before you can summon them again. Reyes then, as before, sells this one on the basis it's good for hauling rugs to the junkyard. I didn't have any rugs to throw away, but there were some 6th Streeters that looked at me funny. Sadly, any G-force exerted on the car still sends this lot sliding out of the back and renders that feature useless. Fortunately, I was told by my smart gun that bloodstains can be removed with one easy trick and vinegar. For those wanting the most classic looking pickup truck in Cyberpunk 2077 though, look no further than the Thorton Mackinaw MTL1, a car that I've had a soft spot for ever since I masterfully navigated it from the top of a cliff into an alleyway. Not wanting to tarnish that previous success though, I'm instead testing this today on Reyes' selling points. See, apparently this thing is a heavyweight which can use street lamps in the way a bowling ball would use bumpers, and cannot be tripped up by obstacles whatsoever. And to be fair, it does blitz through the collapsible street lamps as though they weren't there. But as is the nature of most games, anything indestructible in the environment will still bring this car to a debilitating halt. That said, its tremendous 5,000 plus weight does bode pretty well as a ramming machine, and what the car loses thanks to game physics, it more than makes up for in endurance. It took 3 whole hits from the projectile launcher to blow this thing up in my destruction tests, though only 4 mags from Dying Night, which is kind of upper mid, though it's still up there as one of the top 10 beefiest cars in the base game, and beats the Colby Butte now thanks to its endurance. Just don't expect to outrun any pursuers, it's still just got a top speed of 108. But for a reasonably low 33k eddies, can you really expect much more? Just beating the Mackinaw though, in lower mid beefy muscle cars, is the Villefort Alvarado Delegate. I spoke before, in 1.6, about how this is the big showmany mob boss car of the game. Cruising around with 6 wheels like you own a place somewhere, but there's a little more to it than that now. Whilst boasting a slightly lower weight to horsepower ratio than the Mackinaw, this car makes up for that in handling. Indeed, the front 2 wheels aren't just for show, and add a little more control when cornering for that very slight edge. Of course, whilst the gangster V driving this thing has already paid off the cops, there's of course occasion where a display of power is required. And at a relatively reasonable 38k, this X-car of a disgraced Valentino could be just the thing you're looking for to survive any heated ordeals. I found, in fact, that these extra tyres can't be shot out, whilst the car itself can take 100 rounds or 5 whole mags from Dying Knights direct to the engine before blowing up, or alternatively 3 whole hits from the projectile launcher. Pair that with a speed topping out at 118, and you're looking at a pretty balanced all-rounder that's just on the slow side. It may still be style over substance, but that doesn't mean it's all of the former and none of the latter. And for some of you, this will be an offer you can't refuse. Were you to type in pimp car on Google, you wouldn't get images of this car specifically, but you would get results somewhat similar, albeit without the convertible aspect. Now, far as we know, El Cesar, who we can win this from in Beat on the Brats, is just a down on his luck boxer, not a pimp. But this is a variant model of the Villefort Alvarado Playboy, so, you know, getting this from Cesar is very simple. Just beat him in the boxing wager, and he'll be forced to forfeit his ride to you. Of course, you can be a totally soulless merc and take your wager back too, but then you'd be leaving the dude and his girlfriend out to dry with their unborn kid on the way. Let me know down below how you tend to play this one. The car pretty much matches the Alvarado Delegate in terms of stats, but did only require 2 projectiles instead of 3 to blow up, so is a little bit weaker. That said, it ranks higher in my opinion due to the overly showy gold aesthetic and the fact we can get it for free, kind of, potentially. In 1.6 I compared it to Greased Lightning, and that hasn't changed. I do think it could be a great setting for a musical number, but more than that now, it literally can be a stylish way to cruise around Night City and get into fights with the local law enforcement. Sure, by the end your preem block of gold won't pick you up any dates, but at least the police probably admired your ride before they utterly ruined it. Be warned though, its status as a convertible will indeed make you, the player, more susceptible to getting hit and or dead. So taking it out for combat is kind of like a question of living a quiet life or going out in a blaze of glory. Delamain may have the same speed and endurance as the regular Cortes Valor, and he may also be a way bigger faff to acquire, by rounding up all of his rogue variants and then fighting your way through his factory. But if you ask me, Del is still superior by quite a long shot, and were we ranking these cars on personality, this one would be sitting right near the top. Alas, Del sits comfortably in C tier, and here's some important things you need to know about getting this car. Quick spoiler warning for the end of Don't Lose Your Mind, so jump to the next timestamp if you haven't played it yet. So at the end of the quest, you'll have to choose from 3 options incredibly reminiscent of Mass Effect 3. Destroy Delamain and let his variants go, reset him and bring them under control, or attempt to merge the personalities into one big old synergized synthesis. I've done a full breakdown for this in my toughest decisions video, but in brief, the only way to have full-on philosophical conversations with Del still is to reset him. The other 2, you'll wind up with one of 2 younger sounding variants who offer just a few insert lines here and there. With full-on reset Delamain though, we can discuss the intricacies of human nature, the similarities between ancient Grecians and Night City gangers, and a whole lot more. Not saying it's the best ending overall, and again, I go into more detail in another video, but purely for the most interesting use of the car thereafter, I'd say go this route. And to generate a new conversation with Del, just get out and fast forward another day. More of lore flavoring, I suppose, than a really good car, but still bumps at a few spots above the Valor. Now, something that would have been really cool is if we could have just input waypoints and have Del drive us there. Maybe he drives and we fully focus on shooting, but I guess that would have meant implementing a whole new mechanic for just one car, so I can see why they didn't do it in this game. So listen, I heard you all on the old cars video. I now see even more the magnitude of hilarity that comes with the idea of Night City's resident cyber demigod driving around in this. MaiMai is practically a meme car at this point, and for 22k, you too can create some utterly ridiculous looking crime scenes. I wonder how many calls there are to dispatch about a lone merc terrorizing Night City streets in a Makigai MaiMai. Like, 1 a month? I mean, it's bound to happen to someone, but still, if you're looking for speed speed, look elsewhere. You can barely reach 100 in this now. And the same goes for endurance. Believe it or not, a thing made up of barely any material sports some pretty low HP. Though in fairness, I did last way longer against the cops than I ever expected. And no doubt they were probably distracted contemplating the top 5 worst decisions they made in their life, which have now landed them in whatever the hell this situation is. In addition, this one is a master of weaving through traffic thanks to its size, with a little more maneuverability than most. A few extra points for that, though considering bikes exist, not as important as it otherwise would be. Still, with all things considered, this one places right at the top of C tier. Alright, it's time we get to the B tier stuff. The basic Archer Quartz will set you back a somewhat more spenny 31k after being sold by a guy who loved it more than life itself to pay for his divorce fees. A situation which ironically came about because his wife thought he loved the car more than her. Now he's lost both, but we have gained something reasonably speedy. Docked in 2.0 to just 130 mile an hour, though that's still a damn sight faster than most of the cars from the previous tier. However, this does come at a cost of being somewhat delicate. It still took 2 projectiles to blow up, but just 2.5 mags from dying knights. Maybe the engine is specifically vulnerable? Cool bit of context though, behind Archer's original expansion into sports cars, and it's all because of the Heller. That thing literally removed a huge portion of the boring A to B driving community, but by diversifying with this, Archer were able to capture the hearts and minds of both nomads and boy racers everywhere, certainly tailored for the gotta go fast but on a budget street kid community, and resultantly 17% of all collisions involve one of these, even though they make up just 2% of road traffic. The superior starter vehicle has and always will be though the Thorton Galena Rattler, despite that now when you drive it, it feels like it's choking to death thanks to V's personal modifications. That said, on the actual road, it is still noticeably leagues above the worst car in the game, basic Galena. Hitting speeds of 130, this one is actually totally viable for getting around quickly and still worth using for sentimental nomads. Not the most sturdy car in the world, but its Badlands life means reinforced tires and the ability to survive one whole explosion, so by no means terrible, and technically cheaper as well than the basic Galena. See, sometime after the prologue, V will scrap this and only rediscover it after the heist, receiving a text that it's back up and running again. This is thanks to somebody attempting to fix it up for themselves, who turns out to be none other than YouTuber Alana Pierce, or in this timeline, Lana Prince.
Should have started with the step motor, would have been quicker.
Says who? And why?
Cause it's iffy, starts sticking. Clear the carbon deposits and it starts running like new again.
Fuck! I replaced the entire throttle.
Now, back in 1.6, we could buy this from Alana for a mere 100 eddies, which, let's be honest, was ridiculous. That's been raised to a much higher 5k now, though it still doesn't feel like enough for her to get a new vehicle. Unless, I mean, maybe the prices on AutoFixer could just be a total ripoff, to which we're none the wiser. Hopefully, Lana doesn't replace the next car's brake fluid with water too, though, and does manage to escape Night City. In real life, she also makes some pretty cool stuff, and can be found on YouTube under Chara Lanazar. The prize for effective but affordable SUV goes to the Emperor 620 Ragnar, quoted as a tank made for city driving. And the NCPD did indeed commission for these things to be their heavy-duty squad cars. Driving it, we can see why. Alright, yeah, it can only just about get past 100 in very prime conditions, but in terms of raw power level, this car is an emperor of the road, and makes the Cortez's claim of heaviest vehicle look even more ridiculous now. Are there better sizable cars in the department of raw power? Yes, but generally they're only acquired from quests, and if you want a powerful vehicle, quick and easy from AutoFixer, this one will set you back just 38,000 eddies. They're also heavily utilized by Militech, and any law breaking in the Badlands 2 will result in being descended upon by a whole host of these, able to carry up to 9 people, allegedly, or indeed heavy weaponry. So yeah, this won't get you ahead of the competition, but it will get you on par with it. It's also got the kind of toughness stats you would expect, though it is going to get dethroned a little later on. What was once in the top 10 cars is now, quite rightfully might I add, right the way down here. The Quadra Type 66 640 TS is the base variant we get of the car for which will have so many derivatives and unique models. Back in 1.6, I praised this one for its supreme handling and lauded the basic model as one of the best, whereas now it gets up to a mere 150 on the flats, and its traction control makes it swerve a hell of a lot more than the other Type 66s in my experience. It's also got far lower endurance for combat, with 0 explosion resistance and not great but not terrible 3.5 dying night mags before it blew up. Design-wise, the green aesthetic is fairly sleek to its merits, but not nearly enough of a standout when compared to any of the other uniques. Fortunately, it's not locked behind a price tag and is instead gifted by Dino as a reward for completing all 5 gigs in the city centre, which, if you want an interesting breakdown on the intricacies and details of, then check out my video for it. Otherwise, try using this as a baseline with which to compare every other Type 66. At least, that's what I'm doing. Up next is the Quadra Type 66 General Lee. Still the cheapest to buy Quadra in the game at just 52,000 eddies, and now it's been docked in speed too, down to a max of 150, same as the regular on the flats. I do kind of get why they've docked all these speeds. Every car beforehand appeared to gravitate towards the upper end of high speed, which kind of resulted in a lack of variance between all of the cars. And in fairness to this one, there are Type 66s out there now with a slightly weaker endurance than this, though they do win out on other merits. I mentioned in 1.6 how this Quadra in particular was a tough one to handle, and that still does ring true. In fact, this and the base variant as of this update are the two to feel most similar in that regard. No doubt its handling is a characteristic behind why it's for sale in the first place, after the passionate 6th Streeter who owned it last was quietly removed from life after driving into a corpo during one of those damned deadly street races. Tell you what though, far as the 66s go in appearance, this is definitely one of the winners in that department, with coloration and also its design somewhat modelled off of the iconic Dodge Charger from Dukes of Hazzard, a fact that I read in my comments pretty much every week, if not day, on the First Cars video after labelling this as an homage to Ford Mustangs. I hear you all, and here I am rectifying that mistake, but you got to understand that show ended a fair many years before I even existed, so yeah, sorry about that, and thank you to everyone who pointed it out. After so many cars got a rebalancing speed nerf in 2.0, the Quadra Turbo R does, to be fair, stand out a bit more as one of the speedier cars in the game, maxing out at about 160 on the flat, but accelerating like an absolute dream, as you could probably expect from a sports car. In fact, its price tag of just 69,000 has made it the best-selling sports car of the 2070s, and after stat reworks for the cars all round, it's pretty clear why. Not only does it beat Type 66s like the General Lee in terms of speed, it's also got some new awesome unique sound effects when accelerating. Satisfying to drive for definite. And either my driving's gotten better over the past 7 months, or the handling of this has been improved. Not entirely, it can still struggle on corners, though not nearly as much as it did before. We're warned on the website that this thing won't stay available for long, and I'm sure that would have been the case if we weren't AutoFix's only customer. Furthermore, and this may be a nothing factor depending on how damage is applied to vehicles, but this one's engine is in the back, and if indeed shooting the engine makes the car explode quicker, something that seemed to be the case when I blew them all up, then this one is actually better driving towards pursuers rather than away from them. Not that driving away at these speeds is too much of a problem either, and this one, paired with some good maneuvering skills, is actually fast enough to escape. With a top speed of 170 now, Cthulhu is proof that not all Type 66s are created equal, and while sporting a less flashy design than the General Lee, there's no doubt that this one holds some ancient eldritch power under the hood. I mean, that statement actually feels a little hollow now in wake of one of the new 2.0 vehicles, but we'll come to that. This vehicle's 666 horsepower at least is a clear reference to all that demonic imagery. It also allows you to plow through most other vehicles with relative ease, prices. For 67,000 it can be bought from AutoFixer, but only after completing the Beast in Me questline, which again I've got a whole video going into, but just briefly, because it can be hella useful, I will explain the method to get it for free. Spoiler warning of course for the street races, so jump to the next timestamp if you know. So after the Santo Domingo race, Claire will ask you to help her kill Peter Sampson for inadvertently causing her husband's death. We need to refuse her request, explaining we'll still race, but only to win. Then in the grand finale, we do need to leave the race and follow Peter, but after that you should be able to convince Claire not to go through with it. She'll still gift us Beast, but a few days later, Peter will also gift us Cthulhu. It's not overall the best Type 66 out there, but it is one of the toughest in the base game, losing out to just the superior Javelina and the new Hoon, making it actually the best for combat if you prefer your own guns over vehicle-mounted weapons. The Shion MZ2 may still very much live in the shadow of the Shion Coyote, but I found it much more of a merit unto itself in 2.0. As another basic sports car, it very much feels like a superior version of the Archer Quartz. Costing a grander 57 grand, its previous owner was another example of someone who fancied themselves a racer but simply couldn't maintain control. Prior to 2.0, I'd have understood, but now I actually find it to be one of the niftiest, best handling, non-unique racing cars, taking bends like a champ and pleasantly surprising me where I thought I was going to lose control. It's a very popular night city racing car, and clearly with good reason now, as I'd imagine more drivers survive using them. More, that is, not all. When testing durability though, it was definitely on the more fragile side. Understandable, it's built for speed, not duration, save for one thing. The tyres on this car, they don't seem to puncture. I'm presuming that's a bug and it's going to get patched later, but even still, that would have made it particularly effective in car chases if anyone ever really shot out your tyres, which still, after testing most of these at the time of writing this, hasn't happened once. Not saying I want that feature, it would get kind of annoying after a while like it does in GTA, but a tiny part of me is screaming for that immersion element. And saying this aloud now, as we get later in the video, yes, I do get my tyres shot out, but not that much to be fair. Oh, and this Shion also sports some preem new sounds. Have a listen. These next two I've buffed massively up the list for 2.0, and to be fair, back in the first video I literally did say they'd be way more popular in the future. The first of these is the Thorton Mackinaw Saguaro, or possibly Saharo, rewarded by Dakota for completing all 9 of her Badlands gigs, which again, the intricacies and nuances for you can learn all about in this video. But why does a truck with a top speed of just 125 now manage to sneak its way into this position? Yep, you guessed it, this heavily armored thing provides both an adequate amount of protection and power for surviving all but the most heated combat scenarios. Ramming, shooting at, and to a lesser degree escaping in this one is incredibly easy, up until about 4 stars when the weaponized hellhounds come rolling in. The tyres are very reinforced, needing 2 shots to puncture in the front and 3 in the back, with over 5 mags of Dying Night to the engine to blow it up, though this may have been an unfair advantage here in the fact that I couldn't pop the bonnet. And for the low price of completing 9 extremely dangerous, life-threatening tasks, what more could you really ask for? There's a reason Pan Am was so desperate to get her variant of this car back, and that is the fact that outside of the Aldecaldo quests, this is the closest thing to a tank that we get to drive. Then of course, we have Beast. Not a car we need to complete 9 gigs for this one, but rather just a few street races. The 2 cars sport the same info snippet when scanned and are identical stats-wise in every single way, bar one it would seem, which ultimately pushes Beast a nose ahead for me this time around. See, in my endurance-based tests, the Saguaro blew up after getting hit by just 2 projectiles. Beast, on the other hand, required 3. A tiny, but nonetheless superior edge on Beast's behalf when venturing into the most high-octane, explosive battles. Though realistically, you won't notice a difference driving either, so it's down to your personal aesthetic preference. Be warned though, you can lose out on this one during the Beast in Me final race if you don't listen to Claire and do what she wants. There's no point me spoiling it here, but if you want a full breakdown on the various outcomes and morality surrounding this quest, then go check out my video on another 5 terrible decisions. Otherwise, just like the description says, this car is ready for a wild ride. A much more true statement now, given we can get the full combat experience with it. Look, Thorton Colby Little Mule was already way too much of a facelift than the Colby deserved. Previously able to reach speeds of 189, that has now been docked to 137, but in exchange, they went and slapped some guns on the thing, fulfilling its destiny as warrior vehicle of the Badlands, and so far removed now from the family car of safety and warmth upon which it's based. For just 41k, I do believe this to be the cheapest weaponized vehicle in the game, and you can afford that pretty early into Act 2. Especially if using the discount coupons by stealing cars for Reyes. This is a stupidly fun mechanic that they've added now. These guns seem to have the power of a Mark 31 HMG and never run out of ammo. A drawback to this compared to just regularly firing your own weapons though, is the car can only shoot directly forwards, and aiming, as it were, can only be done by moving around and doing nifty little donuts. On the plus side, that means every time I drive this thing and enter combat, I do find myself recreating one of the best scenes from No Time to Die. This is way better for blowing up enemy vehicles, and it does so a lot quicker, but when trying to hit human targets, accuracy and control can be an issue, and I do wish that the weaponized vehicles would still let us switch out to our own guns. Please correct me if we can do that, I just can't find a keybind that allows it. On top of all this though, the little mule comes with very reinforced tires, a fair amount of bullet endurance, and some explosion resistance too. If that's not a quality value, battle-ready Badlands car, then I don't know what is, and it's a great first entry to the A-tier vehicles. Here's a vehicle that I wanted to leave in the top 10, but it's facing a lot of competition. The Quartz Bandit may not be a tremendous improvement from the regular Quartz on paper, jumping from a speed of 130 to just 145, though it does get some reinforced tires, explosion, and bullet resistance, despite having a very pronounced and targetable engine mounted on the back, which does, to be fair, lead to a swifter death in a chase. It also costs a way steeper 69 grand compared to the basic one's 31, but none of this matters. This car isn't about stats, it's about soul, and with 2.0's improvement to many of the engine sounds, this one has received some great treatment of its own. It may not be too audible under the rev of the engine, but I love the underlying new turbo sound. Just listen. Honestly, this car just has so much character to it, regardless of whether or not some lower on the list cars could technically beat it in a race. In fact, with the relative nerf the Widowmaker rifle has received in 2.0, it's almost tempting to not go the extra mile for Pan Am in Ghost Town and instead receive this car from Rogue for free immediately after. Widowmaker will still crop up eventually, but not until Queen of the Highway. Of course, that all depends on whether or not you're happy to ignore Pan Am, but for getting this car more easily now, I just might be. I think it's great how the devs took their deliberate worst car of the game and evolved it up to something this good. The Galena Gecko was brilliant before, don't get me wrong, but now on the order of rankings, I'd say it's even better. Incredibly nifty and maneuverable are two qualities you absolutely want in a vehicle whose weapon system is entirely tied to which way it's facing. This thing spins around quicker and better in tight spaces than the Little Mule ever could, and it reaches a higher top speed of 150, though do be warned, its endurance stats are all noticeably lower, and it would take a mere 3 magazines from Dying Night to the engine to end this thing. However, huge combat scenarios where this would meet a swift end are not what it's designed for, and there's far more optimized vehicles with rockets and such for that, which I'll cover in the Phantom Liberty follow-up to this. What the Gecko is though, is another weaponized vehicle you can get fairly soon into Act 2 with 45k for more easily dealing with out in the open combat. Just rock up to some scanner hustles in this thing and spin around a few times till everyone drops dead. It's that easy. And for traversing the Badlands especially, this thing sports a killer suspension, perfect for bumpy terrain, something that's always been the case, but I will reiterate here. And I'm confident to say that it's one of the most nimble Badlands cars of the base game. Not the best, it's too weak for that, but it does maneuver brilliantly. What do you get when you yet again take the Quadra Type 66, improve it again, but more than Cthulhu and General Lee this time, then top it off with a sick-ass silver paint job and black racing stripes? You of course get the Quadra Type 66 Avenger, a Ford Mustang which, as I said in the last video too, bears some resemblance to the Batmobile that Robert Pattinson drives. Now this may not be the best or even second best Type 66 anymore before accounting for Phantom Liberty, but it is without a doubt one of the sleekest designs that it doesn't sport 50 million bells and whistles. Improving vastly, on Cthulhu at least, we have 777 horsepower and a top speed of 182, surpassing even the VTEC now, though do be warned its endurance stats haven't really improved at all upon the regular Type 66, and I would recommend using this to escape the law, but probably not to face it, or any gangs for that matter. An overall improved model though, of course, comes at a steeper price, and this one is 75k, getting into territory now that's lining up with some of the best cyberware, gear that's going to make far more noticeable improvements on your game, especially given you can get better cars than this for free. Though I get for some of you it's all about design, and in that regard, you are going to look and feel like a total badass cruising Night City in this thing. The Archer Quartz Sidewinder has been in the game since the beginning, and if you ever stole someone else's, you too would know it was a really nice car to drive. All brilliant quirks of the Bandit, but souped up for Badlands terrain. Sadly, it was never ownable. Until now, twice over. There's the base Sidewinder, with rockets that I'll cover in Phantom Liberty cars, but also now in the regular game, you can buy the Quartz Spectre from Autofixer for 79k. That's just 10 more than the Bandit, and whilst I love that car, I can't pretend this one doesn't beat it in every department whilst maintaining that same look and feel. 160 top speed, 520 horsepower, and did I mention mounted guns? Yeah, okay, you don't get the iconography of the Bandit, and the two were pretty much on par in endurance testing, but for the less frequent time we need to use cars now thanks to Air Dash, I did find myself shamefully having more fun with the Spectre, and that Badlands suspension too makes the handling exceptional, and I'm really glad we can finally own this properly. It may not be the best Badlands car, or even second best, but if you like the Bandit, then you'll really like this. Before we had literal Bond cars which could actually do cool spy shit, we had the Herrera Outlaw, a sleek yet powerful, awesome looking car that ultimately was just smooth to drive, with a perfect balance of speed and handling. Today, it reaches speeds of about 175, but paired with that residual ability to cruise the streets with immense control, it is still one of the absolute best road cars money can buy to traverse Night City, with that money specifically totaling 92,000 eddies. Definitely want to save up a few coupons from car missions to buy first, but totally worth doing so. With allegedly just 1,000 left in the world too, this is undoubtedly a car for the elite. And whilst V will be getting this sweet view of modern, yet not too futuristic dials, we as players will predominantly be seeing a nice looking rear grille of pinkish lights and the Herrera logo, which totally isn't a copy my homework just don't make it look obvious rendition of the Jaguar or Puma logos. But whilst this is a top tier street car, a street car it is only. Taking this to the Badlands is a bad idea. Not only will you ruin your pre-new ride, but you'll also witness it in a far worse light, getting snagged up on every little rock and shrub that it comes across. Couple that with the just okay resistance to damage, not to mention the fact it was the first time I actually had a tyre shot out. And okay, yeah, it was really annoying. I completely take back what I said. I'm very glad this isn't a more common occurrence. Please don't change it. Anyway, all this is to say, keep it out of the Badlands. This car belongs exclusively in Night City, where street corners to hide from pursuers are just around every, well, street corner. Now, if you're wondering what a truck with awful acceleration that's barely capable of exceeding 100 miles an hour is doing so very high up the list, well then my chum, why don't you sit down and let me tell you the story of the arcade game, the mattress, and the hexadecimal code. Just let me warn you, when we get to the end, your grasp on what reality actually is, well, it might start to slip. The Mackinaw Demiurge is the reward, for lack of a better word, for solving, for another lack of a better word, the FF06B5 mystery. An often hugely blown out of proportion conspiracy that has been so fun to discuss for the last few years. Finally, in 2.0 though, the devs gave back the same amount of love we'd put into investigating it and created a huge multi-part solution. It involved clues from The Witcher 3, hexadecimal code conversions, Wolfenstein clone arcade games, and a fair amount of sitting AFK. It's one of the most interesting sets of videos I've ever created, and I'd highly recommend checking out my 3-part series when you're done here for full full context, though I wouldn't be able to paraphrase it in this video without spanning at least half of it. But there is a shortcut, because all you essentially have to do for the truck is come to these coordinates in the Badlands, wait on this mattress sometime within the hour of 4 AM, literally don't move or anything for about 7 to 8 real-life minutes until this happens. We'll go through a cutscene, get a glimpse into the base code of the universe, read about a man quite possibly stumbling into God's office, before finally inheriting said same man's truck. Is it a reward? Is it the key to something even more? Well, I'll tell you what it is for now. It's a set of 4 triple reinforced tires, a double explosion-resistant chassis, and with an exposed engine, a not particularly bullet-resistant monster. It's also the weightiest thing we can own in the base game, but packs a ton of horsepower to compensate, basically terrorizing the roads, towering above everyone else, and crushing those on the ground. It's sturdy, but can still get knocked around by other vehicles, so not definitively the winner when it comes to power. However, it does traverse obstacles better than anything else, and can even have a good go getting into the huge landfill area. A very unique vehicle, and driving experience unlike any other, logs behind one of the absolute craziest, most esoteric mysteries ever seen in a video game, and it's predominantly that fact that makes it the first entry into S tier. They say that some of the best things in life are free. Oxygen, my videos, and more importantly, this next car, which is arguably the most iconic of vehicles in Cyberpunk 2077. Splashed across promotional material and being one of the only cars to sport a Witcher bobblehead alongside the starter Hella make this, in my eyes, a car canonically owned by V. Though what is and isn't canon won't be a problem, of course, until we get to a sequel. In fact, I'm very curious to see how they deal with all of that. But alas, the Turbo R VTEC is of course a souped-up version of the basic model, with top speed increased, though not by that much to be fair, from 160 to 170. And in fact, upon reaching this, you can actually kind of hear the engine reach its limits. Though it's still very much a car designed with speed as a priority, accelerating with extreme power and sporting a massive 740 horsepower, a huge boost to the first one's 480. These modifications seem to have been made out of gratitude by the 6th Street mechanic Jake Estevez, after we saved his car from the ire of an angry mob boss who was continually getting made a cuck of. His flirtatious wife had an affair with Jake, and, well, others too. You can learn about it in my Haywood Gigs video. Anyway, after completing the life's work gig and saving Jake's life's work, we'll unlock the side quest Sex on Wheels, wherein we retrieve this reward absolutely free, or I suppose technically at the cost of venturing into one very deadly garage and retrieving a far inferior vehicle. Whilst the Turbo R VTEC may be the most iconic car purely of this game's making, Johnny's Porsche 911 Turbo is an opportunity to drive a beautiful piece of real-life iconography, all modified to fit the 2077 setting. With this update's rebalancing, it now reaches 150 on the flats as opposed to 160 before, but given the dock-in speed for most cars, it probably makes it comparatively faster now in the overall ranking, sitting in the kind of upper mid for speed. Of course, with the twists and turns of cruising night city streets, handling and acceleration are equally important factors. And not only does this one excel in both, but the sound of the Turbo has this sort of understatedness. You really don't want to miss this one, and to anyone who doesn't know, it's found in a shipping container at the Ebonike docks during the Chipping Inquest. Doesn't matter how we resolve that one, so long as we come up here and push this button, lowering the container to reveal
my ride. Hop in. I'll even let you drive.
If you bring this one to the dates for Blistering Love, Rogue will also mention that her and Johnny used to drive around in this when they dated.
This Johnny's Porsche? Where'd you get it?
That's what was in the container, the one Grayson was talking about.
Okay. Got a lot of memories in this car. Let's go.
Now look carefully at the passenger side dashboard, and we can actually see the signature of lead vehicle artist Jakub Przyzbalewski. Very cool extra detail. Though do not expect this one to last long in any fights though, comparatively to the rest, as it took just 2.5 mags to explode this thing with Dying Nights. Though in fairness, I do gotta say, all vehicles last a hefty amount longer now by default than they would have done in 1.6. So as you can expect, most of this car's points are won simply for being a Porsche 911. Which just about secures it its place in S tier. Do you want to stand out, be noticed, be bold? Do you have an insanely high number of eddies to burn and genuinely can't think of anything better to spend it on? Then perhaps it's time you bought the Rayfield Aerondyte Guinevere for €155,000. Not actually the most expensive vehicle in the game anymore, but we'll get to that in the Phantom Liberty video. As before, this was previously canonically owned by the Ambassador of Argentina, who had to pawn off his worldly possessions and flee the city after his country instigated martial law. Previously, it was just a very nice car and a huge status symbol, though ridiculously expensive by anyone's standards. Now it actually has a little more utility, as one of the beefiest hypercars in the game, needing 5.5 dying knights to the engine or 3 whole projectiles, but as more of a street car, no reinforcement in the tires, which in this instance did get shot out again. And I'm starting to wonder if that's just a feature you get at 4 or 5 stars, a wanted level difficult to reach unless you're stopping and fully engaging in combat with the police, something again which this excels at, and the lack of windows made it very hard for V themselves to get hit, though that does also annoyingly mean that we can't fire straight ahead, but rather have to navigate our targets to the side or rear of the car. Kind of the inverse to weaponized vehicles, I guess. It did survive though for a lot longer than most cars would in this scenario, and had I wanted to, I could have easily driven away and not been caught, with this thing still topping 190, same as in 1.6, though of course that speed is a lot more meaningful since so few cars can reach it now. But with 950 horsepower too, this is also one of the best cars for just barging through traffic, and where a stray obstacle would usually send me swerving, I felt comfortably in full control at all times in this vehicle. Suffice it to say, in 2.0, the Aerondyte's overall stats make it a lot more worthy of that hefty price tag. And I haven't even had to mention yet the fact that Aerondyte references the legend of King Arthur, or indeed that it's also the name of the best sword from the Witcher games. With all the changes in 2.0, I really expected this one to fall a little further down the list, but the Shion Coyote continues to be one of my all-time favourite cars. And now it has bloody guns on the front. What more could you ask for? At 77 grand, it is on the more expensive side of Badlands vehicles, but a hell of a lot cheaper, I think, than the Bonewrecker, which of course comes at the heavy cost of locking you out of, what, a tenth of the overall game? I mean, the bigger parts at least. Despite that, even, the Coyote is just better in every way, with a top speed of 170, which yes has been docked and now places it below the Javelina but is still very good, then a far greater horsepower of 570, despite the same weight. Sure, it's not going to let you tear into a military base, mounted guns blazing, and survive, and in fact we won't really get to cars that can do that until the Phantom Liberty video, but the reinforced tyres and basic resistance do offer some durability, and what with Militech being the more powerful law enforcement of the Badlands, cruising around in one of these stands you a better chance of surviving that onslaught and fighting back. Of course, unless you prefer it for the aesthetic preference though, it is no longer the go-to Badlands vehicle, but might just beat the next entry still on suspension alone. Matching the Avenger for speed at 182, the Quadra Javelina then beats that one as the souped-up Badlands variant in its armor rating. With an insane 1,000 horsepower despite a weight lower than that of the Avenger, you'll find few cars in 2077, or even Phantom Liberty for that matter, packing so very much power behind the hood. Of course, with Badlands suspension and armor too, this car is a triple threat now of speed, power, and endurance. It's got triple reinforced rear tires and double on the front, and over 4 mags of dying knight to the engine, or 2 projectiles, is what it took to take this thing down. Turns out that explosion resistance extends to mines too, by the way, though they're a little weaker, with the car only exploding after I'd driven over the third one. But actually, that's not all. Let's call this a quadruple threat. With the mounted side cannons included too, you can plow through traffic both as a battering ram and just a weapon in general. And in fact, that's how Reyes described it on the website, when trying to convince you to part with the 99k eddies in exchange. Again, don't forget the coupons. But even without them, that is absolutely worth the price. Even if we took away all the bells and whistles, this thing is still a roaring monster, with exhausts poking out the top of the car, so you can both feel and see the absolute furnace blazing inside. Clearly not the best car in the base game, in my opinion, but depending on how you looked at it, you could definitely reason that it is. If you thought the Caliburn was getting dethroned as the fastest car of the game, then think again. Now, I need to double check all the Phantom Liberty vehicles before definitively stating that, but I'm 95% sure this is still the case. The Caliburn's relatively unchanged top speed of about 208 now holds a lot more meaning when we consider that it's just a small handful of cars that can now get anywhere near that. I predicted back in the last Cars video that after 2.0, speed and handling wouldn't be the only determining factors to the quality of a car anymore, and that this thing would be nerfed by the fact that it's fragile as hell. Actually though, it performed pretty well on the endurance test. Not as exceptionally as the Aerondyte, granted, but that's quite a good thing, since Rayfield's stupidly expensive other car is now at least better at something. But since both of these come with crystal dome windows and no built-in weapon systems, there is again an inability to shoot straight ahead, and results in this awkward opening of the doors during combat. Mind you, that's not to say this is a car to always run away from fights in. Indeed, its 1660 horsepower acceleration and just all-round good handling give this one the ability to maneuver tight spaces with exceptional control, and the speed at which it suddenly goes makes it one of the few cars that enemies can't really sidestep. So no shooting frontwards, no problem, just drive forwards instead. Couple this with the fact that we can get Merkman's model absolutely free, and you're still looking at one of the best cars in the game, and still probably the best for simply getting from A to B, in my opinion. Just return to the Badlands Tunnel after completing Ghost Town until you come across this shipping container that's containing it. Equally, you can pick up the one from Autofixer for 135 grand, which is white and gold, though some people might tell you it's blue and black, if you get that reference. Why would you buy a second one? Well, obviously, in case you lose the first one and still want to get to your destination as fast as possible, without waiting on the 5-minute cooldown, which is actually more useful than you'd expect. Easy S tier and still king of speed, with some nice new sounds now as well. But with all the new changes to cars in 2.0, the definitive best is no longer just a question of speed, nor power, handling, weaponry, or design, but rather it's a culmination of all these things. And the car I enjoy driving the most now, before getting to Phantom Liberty vehicles, has gotta be the Quadra Type 66 Hoon, added in 2.0 and discoverable in a warehouse up in Northside. You'll find the keys to the thing under a shelf nearby, after which the car will be yours, absolutely free. With the same toughness performance as the Javelina, but just a top speed of 170, it of course doesn't win in the speed department. But consider the fact that it also has mounted guns and is of course free, and we start to get somewhere. But really, where this thing takes victory is in its design. It is of course modelled as an homage to the Hoonicorn and Ken Block, who tragically passed away in January of this year. An incredible rally driver and absolute YouTube star. Seriously, type in Ken Block and just watch some of the crazy stuff the man could do. And this car, well, its handling is just fantastic. Brilliant control both off-road and on, allowing us just to attempt to recreate some of the crazy drifts and turns that Ken Block was capable of pulling off. Not that I can drive nearly well enough in this game to do that, but maybe you'll have better luck. On the side, we can see Ken Block's initials and year of birth and death, alongside his rally number of 43. Overall, I'd say the general paintwork and decoration of this thing really does make you feel like a rally driver, and since traversing the streets of Night City is rarely a straightforward drive, I won't get hung up on it not being the fastest. Indeed, cornering well and maintaining good momentum are just as important to getting around overall. And now, with fights to consider too, this armoured vehicle won't leave you high and dry for that either. Whilst other cars can definitely beat it in individual departments, the overall makeup of the Hoon, as well as the touching tribute that it also is, make it the top of the list for me and a solid S tier. For now at least, because we of course still have about 20 Phantom Liberty vehicles to look into, alongside now 7 bikes, which I'm also going to revisit in wake of the 2.0 update. Some of those cars are also going to fire rockets, whilst the bikes now allow you to swing katanas like some mounted Cyber Knight. For now, comment below your favourite car from the base game and why. Is speed still the most important to you, or is it a careful balance of varying factors now? Huge thanks, as always, to the supporters over on Patreon for going the extra mile and keeping these videos free of irrelevant sponsors. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for part 2, covering all the new vehicles from Phantom Liberty. I'm Sam Bram, and I'll see you soon in another video.